It was another boring day at the Galactic Trade Syndicate Legal Matters Bureau building, and one particular case agent was going through the motions as they always did. This agent, whose specialty was reviewing cases tied to cybernetically enhanced individual cases, sat at his desk with a cigarette held delicately between his powerful pincers as he took short puffs from it. His current task was to await his next case file to appear on his terminal, but in the interim, he thought it safe to sneak in a smoke break. For him, this was entirely ordinary, and sometimes might even be a sign that the case assignment department was jammed up again. He let out a sigh as he thought about spending the next 2 hours staring at a blank screen again. His boredom was short-lived when he heard the sound of sneakers squeaking against the polished tile floor outside of his room. Out of all of the species that the office employed, only humans continued to manufacture rubber-bottomed shoes. And of the 2 humans that worked there, only one worked on the same floor as him and would bother coming by his lonely place of work, Chelsea from the support team. Knowing that she wasn't pleased by the smell of smoke, he took one last drag before allowing it to fall into his claws to be crushed in his grasp on its way down into the trash. One of the perks of being covered in a durable shell was not feeling the embers on your shell. His eyes moved from the screen down to the trash as he watched the cigarette fall. But when he looked back to the door, he was surprised to see that the human was already there and smiling at him. She spoke in a voice that rang in the square room, a trait of hers she attributes to her years as a singer. "Howdy, Hakkar. Long time no see." She quickly stepped into the room and stole a seat next to him, riding along on its wheeled frame over to him and using his shell as an anchoring point. She chuckled and knocked on his shell a few times, a form of greeting she had conjured up specifically for him. Hakkar's voice was quite the opposite to Chelsea's, and was more like a low growl that came from the depths of his broad frame. "Likewise, but weren't you here last week? Doesn't seem like a long time to me." He returned their special greeting by reaching up with one of his more dexterous lesser limbs and curling it into a 4-fingered fist for her to make a mock strike against with her own hand. It was a silly gesture, especially with how she splayed her fingers out and made a comical, explosive sound, but he enjoyed her creative greeting nonetheless. She made a false pout and crossed her arms. "A week is a long time, Mr. Grumpy Claws. Typical of an old crab to think that way." She huffed and turned her head away, slowly spinning on the chair until she made a full rotation. "First of all," he began while placing his large pincer on the chair to halt her idle spinning, "I'm barely one of your Earth years older than you, and our species have similar age cycles. Second, a week is a while, but not that long, so quit your pouting already. Third, and this might be a shock to you, but I'm not a grump, I'm a crab, so if anything, I'm being crabby." Chelsea's fake frown slowly fell apart as she fought to contain a laugh, but in the end, her jovial nature could not allow her to ignore his attempt at humor. She chuckled and slapped the top of his shell in delight, which did not cause him any discomfort, then used her toes to scoot the chair closer to him. "Gosh, how could I be so blind?" Hakkar adjusted his stance so he could face her better, his segmented carapace twisting to give a bit more space in the small room as well. "So what brings you here anyway? It's a bit early for you to be down here unless there's a delivery." "Yeah, our system is on hold while that Marstech AI does a security sweep again, so I was told to go down to the tech department and help them. Turns out with him roaming our systems, it's causing some lag in the system and you need to reboot your station." She nodded towards the sleek black box sat beneath his monitor, her eyes flicking from his own to the glowing white power button. He let out an irritated sigh as he jabbed the little glowing circle, a distinct click sounding as it began to reboot. He grumbled in annoyance. Typical IT, not telling us ahead of time that old Edgar would be doing sweeps, then turned back to his friend, who had an awkward purse to her lips. "So, is that all you came here for?" The question caused her to shrug and turn her chair from side to side gently. "Officially, yes, but since the support room is closed, I've got nowhere else to hang out. You don't mind the company, do you?" Her eyebrows raised expectantly, knowing that he humored her. "You can stay. It's not like I've got anything going on either." He tried to smile for her despite his face lacking the muscles or flexibility to do so the result was more as though his 2 sets of jaws had bent incorrectly. His attempt made her smile, which was all he wanted anyways. The computer made its announcement that it was awake again by ringing out with a delicate jingle, followed by a cacophony of alert sounds as the many security systems cried out in alarm. Neither employee reacted to this, as it was normal for the computer to have a panic attack when the system was being checked. But the sound was not pleasing to either one's ears. Hakkar reached over the screen and began typing in his credentials to access the network, while Chelsea averted her eyes to not see his login. But when he hit the confirm key, he was met with a notification that new case files had arrived. He let out a sigh and took stock of the number of files waiting, silently cursing himself for taking that smoke instead of checking in with the IT team down the hall. Chelsea leaned over and took a look at the inbox, letting out a low whistle. "Dang, they really got you working overtime now, don't they?" She leaned forward and put her weight on the table with one arm, marveling at the huge packet of file names waiting for him. "You gonna stay overtime for all of this, or can you tell them that this is overkill?" Probably going to have to tell them of the communication error that occurred, but they'll undoubtedly send someone in to remind me that the service phones exist. He remembered the last time something like this had happened, and he was reprimanded for poor productivity, then thought of how the very next day he was told that the case registry was locked anyway, so his overtime to catch up was practically meaningless. He didn't want that to happen again, but he was wiser now than he was back then and knew he could stretch the truth to a degree. "I can tell them that I was doing physical file sorting when the pileup happened, so they think I was still busy. Lying to the company is bad, Crab." She poked his face with her finger, then smirked as she pointed to one of the file names. "I'll vouch for you if you let me read these with you." Hakkar opened the selected file without a word and silently read over the contents of the case. As was usual with these documents, they would open up with a review over some kind of incident report where an augmented individual was involved and go over who did what and why, and then sometimes come with an inspection team's report on a thorough probing and scanning of the person. The first file was cut and dry for Hakkar. Someone had robbed a store using an internally concealed firearm and shot the clerk. He didn't even need to read the rest of the report and simply hit the accept button, sending the case file directly to the bin of cases waiting to be pursued. Chelsea was not as avid of a reader as the Crabman, so she had yet to see all of the details he had. "Why'd you pass that one so fast?" "Because any weapons installed in a person are illegal unless they're former military. That guy had a non-military configuration as well, so even if he was a veteran, he was in violation for that too. Either way, he's out of the law's care and needs to have it removed." He clicked on the next file and began to scour it as quickly as he had the first one. Clicking on the approve button almost immediately, Chelsea scoffed as she didn't get past the first sentence. "You're making this really boring really fast, you know." She pouted and puffed her cheeks out, giving her friend a bothered look. Hakkar didn't like this look, or that he was bothering her, so he came up with a reasonable excuse to use. "I'm just going to skip the boring ones for you, all right? That one was someone with an intentionally malware-filled data jack. They blew up a server rack because they got fired and decided to give them a parting gift." He skimmed over the file numbers until he saw one he knew she'd like, then pointed to it to get her attention to it. "I'll do some more boring ones to get caught up. Then we can read over some really wacky stuff I know you'll like. Okay?" "Okay," was all that was said in response, though her unamused look did not change. Hakkar took this as a sign that he should put in extra effort for her sake, and for the first time in weeks, he opted to use his species' dual brain capabilities to review the field by twos. This usually gave him a bit of a migraine, but if it was to make his human companion happy, he would do so readily. 2 cases opened simultaneously, each being ready by a different set of eyes on the sides of his head. A case about a rogue doctor performing back alley surgery, and a case of a military veteran getting a parking violation, the doctor being in the wrong for unlicensed practice, and the veteran being overlooked for being up to code on his augments. Another duo, one about a teenager attempting to outrun the law, and another about a woman attempting unlicensed flight, both passed on as clear cases of misuse. 2 more cases slid on the screen, then another pair. Then 12 sets more until Hakkar felt his head feel strained. He put his head in his claws and rubbed at the soft underside of his shell, using his smaller arm to open the case file for Chelsea to read. There, give that one a read while I get some Naxton. He pulled open a drawer and got himself a few tablets of nanomachine-laced pain relievers, popped them into his mandible-covered mouth, then waited with closed eyes for the 5-minute activation time to pass and his headache to magically vanish. He rolled his eyes after opening them and looked to the woman leaned over his desk, his eyes darting from her knee. Length jeans to her loose-fitting shirt with a graphic design of a strange earth cat holding a large golden coin. Humans dressed in such odd clothing, which was strange to him, as his kind seldom wore more than a wide skirt-like article that covered their midsection to the ground, and sometimes a shirt over their own multi-limbed torso. He shook his head and looked back to the screen she was fixed to, reading everything she had in a fraction of the time. Surprisingly, he had gotten to the end of the page and had seen nothing in the report that mentioned what kind of augmentation this individual had. But the fact that there had been over 10 officers of various species involved in the physical restrainment of the suspect, it was apparent that they were housing something of great mechanical strength. Before continuing further, he turned back to Chelsea and produced his credit band to her, tempting her with a wager. Want to bet on what sort of tech this one's running? The human smirked and showed her own, an answer already on her mind. 30 units says construction worker implants, the real big kind. She flexed an arm to show her own musculature, then put her band on the desk. Hakar had a prediction that it was military grade and could guess the exact model it was likely to be. But for the sake of such a vague answer, he would be as open-ended as her. Orbital dropped soldier implants with the high-spec actuators, and I'll match that bet. He placed his next to hers and a green screen appeared with the number 30 in the center. The good thing about those bands was that they listened in and had a smart program to understand what was said. But until both parties agreed on things, they wouldn't confirm the transfer. Hakar liked that feature greatly, as he won many bets like this, but could decline the winnings if he felt like it. He tapped the keys for the next page to appear with the expectation of being right. But instead of the typical augmentations he expected, he was met by the ugliest specimen of a modified human he had ever seen. Bones replaced by high durability mesh, organs removed to make room for expanded power banks and thermal control modules, and all muscle made redundant by the massive hydraulic frame surrounding the nearly entirely mechanical man. Hakar slightly gagged at the sight of this abomination of flesh and metal, while Chelsea simply blinked slowly as she studied the image. She turned to look at him with an impassive face and a bored tone in her voice. Borgophile, and a pretty screwed up one at that. Looks like we were both wrong about the bet after all, 'cause those look like shipboard hydraulics to me. She looked back to the image and shook her head in shame. Loony SOB, turning yourself into a junk heap like that. Hakar scowled at the image once more, before skipping to the next page, then took a deep breath to steady himself. I don't get why some humans do that to themselves. Never has any species reported having individuals replacing their entire bodies with mechanical components. Yet you humans seem to have an unending supply of them. He paused as he realized how rude his words were, wishing to take them back now that he saw his error. I don't mean that as an insult to your species. It is just a statistical fact. Chelsea remained unbothered, then surprised the crabman by making a nonchalant shrug. It's all right. I know what you mean. Back before we joined the GTS, there were a lot less of them because it was so damn risky of a procedure, but the rise in medtech gave a lot of them the option to skip all the hard work of getting strong naturally and just jump straight to being a super soldier. Then there's the ones who saw how big and scary some of the aliens were and thought that they'd turn against us one day, and the only way to defend themselves was to be bigger and stronger than them. Looks like it worked out pretty great for this fella, being dog-piled on until his junkyard mech parts went and bent under the weight. Hakar thought about her words for a moment, looking at his own menacing claws and hard shell as he considered it to be intimidating to someone as soft and delicate as a human. You aren't like those humans, are you? I don't scare you? He tilted his head towards her as she chuckled, causing his eyes to narrow in confusion. Hakar, sweet pea, you're about as scary to me as a puppy. You're too cute and round to be menacing, and those big old eyes of yours are adorable. Maybe if you were maybe 3 feet taller and your claws weren't just big hands in disguise, I'd be worried. But seeing as I know how you are, I can't seem to see you as much of a danger to anyone." To emphasize her point, she held out her fingers spread with the middle and ring fingers separate. Then, with surprising dexterity, moved only her pinky and index fingers outward and inwards in a way he was incapable of. He mimicked the motion by opening his large claws, pointed toward her, then tensed the muscles to split the upper and lower sections of his claw into a larger form of his dexterous hands. Snapping them shut made a hollow clacking sound that brought a smile to her face and a sense of relief to his heart. Searching the next page of the incident report, he took stock of the things this person had done and the extent of their uncontrolled rampage through a suburban area, then noticed the detailed psyche evaluation that had been done when the suspect had yet to undergo whatever transformation led to their hulking size. He let out a sigh as he realized how many different branches would be involved if this case were pushed forward. Sensing he was agitated, Chelsea read the page over faster as she spoke. "Why are you getting so worked up? Can't you just approve this one and be done?" She noticed different details than Hakkar had, namely the location where the homemade augments were looted from and some of the supposed weapons that were on their person. "This case is a mess. You have a civil worker not properly diagnosing a mentally injured individual or offering proper care, a looted military dump site full of decommissioned weaponry and equipment, and local law enforcement officers who were injured by the suspect. If I just hit approve and this falls on the desk of some rookie caseworker, they're going to lose their job if this gets improperly covered. So I have to do more of the casework myself if I want to avoid that." He continued on, his large pincers clenching as he scoured another page. "This is why we have so many restrictions on modifications. People either do dumb stuff, like turn their arms into chainsaws and cut off another person's leg, or try to install an oversized flight system into themselves without a permit and wind up crashing into an office. It's rarely the enhanced one who gets hurt, and almost always has someone else being the one injured. This whole situation was avoidable, but one measure after another failed until we got to the point where someone got hurt. It's honestly a miracle they were able to bring them in alive, but I don't even know if they can be reverted at this point. Gods of the stars, this is a disaster." Chelsea thought about this for a moment, then she saw a linked section on one of the reported weapons. The model number and listen type of item prodded at one of her memories, so she pointed to it. "Hey, click that one." When he did so and opened the file for her, she couldn't help but scoff in disbelief. "I think this case might be a bit easier than you think." Hakkar read the file in an attempt to understand her sudden cockiness. These were just schematics for some kind of broad-use tools and ship-mounted cannons he had never seen before, all tied under the name of gravity guns. He skimmed the page until he saw the signature at the bottom of the screen and realized that he knew that name as the other human who had recently begun working in the office. Hakkar turned around with his mouth open, ready to speak, only to clamp his mouth shut when he saw Chelsea had her communicator open. With a snap, the line connected to the image of a disheveled human sitting on a public transit ship's viewing deck, his hair slicked back and a straw in his mouth. "Thomas here. What's cooking, Shell?" He winked at the screen and smiled, pushing his mustache up slightly. "Nothing much. I just have a work-related request. I'm in Hakkar's office, and we've got a mess of a case he's got on screen. But it actually involves an augment using one of your gravity guns to do some harm to some cops. We were wondering if maybe we could pass this one on to you and your partner personally, since you've got some understanding of how this legal trash fire is going to go." Tomon grimaced through the on-screen picture before turning to his side. "Hey, Mavu, you want to do an augment case when we get back?" "Uh-huh. Yeah." He nodded a few times before looking back to the screen with a wide smile. "We'll take it once we get back from this current case. Tomorrow work for you guys?" Chelsea nudged Hakkar for him to answer, which he sputtered out hastily. Yeah. If it's not a problem for you, Mr. Thomas, thank you." Thomas blew his lips together to make a buzzing sound the communicator didn't quite register, then replied, "No problem. A friend of Chell is a friend of mine. By the way, you can just call me Tom. Oh, gotta go. Landing time. See ya, Chelsea." "Bye, Tommy." The screen went dark as Chelsea turned to look at Hakkar, her teeth bared in a gleeful grin. "Now you don't have to worry about that case anymore. Tom's a genius, and from what he said about his partner, she's a senior agent around here, so the two of them can handle that case easy. HFY let out a sigh of relief, then nodded in agreement. Thank you, Chelsea. I was beginning to become upset about this case. It reminded me of an unpleasant thing that happened. He bowed his head and looked to the floor, both ashamed that he had gotten worked up and hoping he could push the memory aside. A hand patted at his shoulder, and the soothing voice of his companion calmed his nerves. It's all right. Happens to the best of us. I know. How about I go and put in an order for lunch and you can have a smoke while you forward that to Tommy? Give yourself a little break from that stuff and run a few dozen small cases before I come back and we do another doozy. Does that sound good? She didn't need to wait for an answer before HFY was reaching into his drawer for another smoke stick, and she was out the door. With a deep puff of smoke, he let out a sigh and pressed the necessary keys to forward the case file to a specific agent. He didn't realize it at the time, but despite his usual inability to smile as Chelsea did, his face was still curled in such a way that it felt organic and natural to be smiling. He was just glad to have a human friend, one that wasn't a cyborg or half-machine of any kind, the same one that made him smile and reassured him. The day was no longer as boring as it had once been, and for that he was happy.